The Phoenix Suns go down on national TV at the TD Garden, 127-112 to the Boston Celtics. On today's episode of Locked On Suns, what's real and what's not real from a bummer Suns L.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 7 seasons, a writer at Dime Magazine, the host of the Just Basketball Show, wherever you get your podcasts, and the author of the Locked On Suns Insider Feed, which you will hear more about later on the show. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen here on this Thursday night into Friday morning, a post-game edition. Wherever you're finding us, we are free and available everywhere, including YouTube. Hit that follow button or that subscribe button on your preferred platform. Get a new episode in your feed every single day, every Monday through Friday. Get locked onto the Phoenix Suns all season long by becoming an everydayer with the show. This is it. I give you all the stuff you need. What more could you ask for than 5 hot and fresh episodes of good old Locked On Suns every day? Hit that button, guys. Get a new one right there for you to keep you company, to celebrate. Not tonight, but most of the time. Let's dive in. 127-112 again is the final score as the Phoenix Suns travel to Boston and fall in disappointing fashion. I watched the local feed, so I don't know how ugly it was getting on the national feed. I don't even know who was calling the game, and I actually prefer it that way sometimes, but nobody's going to be happy after this one. And rather than doing a moment of the game as I typically would in a game where the Suns got outscored by in every single quarter outside of the fourth, which became irrelevant, and outside of a nice little start, didn't really have any chunks of the game that they controlled. So no moment of the game. Instead, real and not real. And let's start with not real. The Suns did not lose this game because of the officiating. Okay? Let's just discuss it. But I want to I'm not going to beat around the bush. That is my opinion on this game. Rarely do I feel like teams lose because of the officiating, but this wasn't even close to me. All right, so let's start with the numbers, the facts. Free throw attempts were basically equal. Turnovers, okay, those favored Boston a little bit, but not by much, right? This was not a case of the Celtics just reaching their hands in the Suns' cookie jar over and over and over and ripping the ball out and bodying these guys and doing all this. It wasn't that. It was not that. Turnovers were 13-8. So, what was it? What could be the reason you might say that that fouls, that physicality, that officiating decided this game? Well, there were a lot of moments where the Celtics were doing that stuff, right? One time I know Holiday stripped Durant. I believe Holiday stripped Allen at one point. I think White stripped Durant at one point. The Celtics starters had 9 steals, and the Suns only shot 48% from the field. So, obviously, it was a good defensive performance. I'm not taking that away from Boston at all, but the idea that it was somehow the Celtics benefiting from being allowed to do something that the Suns weren't, that's where I run out of belief, okay? Because in order to believe that, you would have to feel like the Suns were matching the intensity, the physicality, the force that the Celtics were playing with, and just weren't. Maybe they were getting called for fouls, right? Where that would result in a lot of Boston free throws, which again, did not happen. Or that even maybe you would say the Suns were forcing the issue, selling the contact, selling the infractions that the Celtics may have been doing and just not getting the calls. I don't think either of those things were happening. And if you've watched this team for long enough like I have, you agree. I mean, you have to agree. This is how it's always been. All right? The Suns took 23 shots at the rim tonight. Boston took 18. That's both very, very few. And again, not enough to me that I'm going to say that the Suns were showing demonstrating to the officials, kind of selling any of this or really pressing it at all. We've seen this before. The Suns play their game, and I'm not going to deny that, again, the Celtics were physical. That's not the problem. But the Suns play their game, and when it gets to be a little too much, they don't necessarily, outside of a few stretches I can think of, like last year's playoffs or the stretch run of the 2022 64-win season, where I would say Booker in particular really became determined to kind of draw that contact and will his way into getting calls and getting trips to the free throw line, but that's uncommon for this team. And as I was saying a second ago, they get uncomfortable and they don't really always adjust. They kind of just continue to play their game, and it bleeds into other aspects of this thing. Maybe, as I'm really not trying to be a jerk about this, but maybe one of the tangible ways you would say that this whole thing affected tonight's game is the Suns became agitated, started asking, that's a little bit of a nice word for it. They started barking for calls and getting into it with officials, including Vogel getting a tech, and that affected their transition defense. There was a play in the third or fourth quarter where Drew Holiday got a pull-up three off of a steal, I believe, where he just walked into it because nobody picked him up, and Beal was still behind the play, letting the ref know that he was unhappy. And that definitely affects it. So maybe that's where you could say that it becomes a problem. But against the Lakers, for instance, guys, just to at least give a little bit here and not just be stubborn in my opinion, there were many Lakers games when the Suns played them like 5 times in the first 40 games or whatever that was. Well, I guess they just played them a couple weeks ago, but the NBA Cup and then a few other ones where I 100% agreed that the calls that, let's for instance say Nurkic was getting called for against LeBron and Reeves was getting and AD was getting versus the level of contact that the officials were allowing against Durant in the post and some of these other situations definitely was obvious. And I talked about it then. The free throw attempt numbers and a whole bunch of other things illustrated that was happening. In this game, the Suns had an opportunity to match Boston's level of intensity and physicality, and I truly believe the refs would have let that go too. But the Suns did not do that, and that is how you get Boston running away with transition points, getting into a rhythm, forcing more turnovers, and winning this game. So that's not real. That's not why the Suns lost. But there are some genuine things that they can point to that went against them that might not always go against them. And we'll break down some of the real reasons why they lost this game coming up next. First, today's show brought to you by eBay Motors, and our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd this year to bring you some of Josh's best fantasy picks all season long. So whether you're prepping for a daily draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week, Josh and eBay Motors are going to team up to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. So let's see who Josh has for us this week on eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. Our old friend Jock Landale, not starting right now, but definitely getting more minutes with Alperen Şengün injured in Houston. Same can be said for Norman Powell. Kawhi Leonard currently out. Russell Westbrook has been out, and Norm Powell continues to just see his touches and his minutes and his productivity go up. Grady Dick finally down the stretch of this season for Toronto after a lot of their trades getting run there and filling it up, at least as a shooter. Keontae George has been playing quite a bit for the Jazz all season, but he gets all the reps he wants now with the Jazz really in tanking position. And then DeAndre Hunter. With Sadiq Bey hurt and a bunch of other guys out, Hunter coming off the bench currently, but getting a lot of minutes and a large role. Josh Lloyd from Locked On Fantasy Basketball going to help you win your fantasy championship. And eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit, and they believe it's the same with your vehicle. I have a Hyundai, and they can be kind of fickle. You might have heard of them getting broken in all the time, and I trust eBay Motors to help me get something that's going to be reliable and fit and work, whether that is a roof, a sunshade flap for the driver's side of my car to keep the sun out of my eyes, or a wheel cover to clip onto the front and make things look a little prettier, to more serious stuff like an LED headlight or a brake kit or a bumper. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Let's keep it rolling here. So that's not why the Suns lost. Officiating, physicality, getting the wrong side of these calls, I just don't buy it, because it's a pattern, because I think it was there for the taking for Phoenix as well, and the numbers just don't really illustrate that there was a big discrepancy there. But the numbers do illustrate that three-point shooting was wildly skewed. And I think you would have to say, right, that something like that, when the Suns get up 31, is a pretty solid number, many of which I think were pretty open. The Celtics did not have a great defensive first half, right? They didn't have an awesome defensive game, period, I would say, outside of the ability to kind of get in guys' grills and do the things we talked about in that last segment. So the Suns had some open looks. They got up a lot of them, and yet still it did not matter, because the Celtics got up 50 and made 25. All right, so I think that's just kind of, I'm never going to call it a fluke, considering Boston, this is what they are, this is how they play, this is what their personnel is. It's not luck, but at the same time, Al Horford making 6 of 10, any team making 25. I mean, come on, you're getting toward the league record. Al Horford making 6, Xavier Tillman even making 1, frankly, like, some of the pull-up threes that Drew Holiday had in this game, the way that they were making threes in transition, those are all things they can do, but anyone would have to admit that 25 is at the upward limit of normal, right? So if you're the Suns, I think you're looking at the situation and saying, hey, we still played them fairly close for the first 3 quarters. The Suns they would make a run and cut it to single digits. It really never got ballooned to an out-of-control level. And we caught them on a bad night. You know, Porzingis didn't even play, and Al Horford put together a vintage performance. So, okay. But part of what caused that problem is the Suns' perimeter defense was god-awful. And so they lost the game, yes, maybe because they got a little bit unlucky as Boston went off from deep, but they contributed to the Celtics going off from deep, if we're being honest with each other, right? I mean, 31 assists for the Celtics, and they were just getting downhill no matter what they did. I mean, it wasn't even complicated. It never is with Boston. Whether it was Tatum, whether it was Brown, whether it was White, whether it was Holiday, Pritchard, these guys were just breaking down the Suns' defense and generating drive and kick offense exactly how they want to. Depending on how much Devin Booker is trying on defense in any given situation, the Suns have precisely one dude who can consistently get through a screen and stay attached to a ball handler or a guy coming off of an off-ball pin-down type of screen on their whole roster. That guy is Josh Okogie. He is not healthy right now, and it was glaring that issue was facing Phoenix tonight. Jaylen Brown has his limitations. He's having an awesome season, but he has his limitations. If you give him any reason to settle for a mediocre shot, he's happy to oblige you. And Jaylen was 8 of 9 of 11, 9 of 13 inside the paint tonight. 9 of 13. And 4 of 6 from the free throw line. So if you just count attacking points from Jaylen Brown, that's 22. 22 points created from penetrating, beating his man, and scoring inside. That's just one example. Tatum had a rough start, but the Suns just let him get going. That's probably not fair with Tatum. I thought Durant did a decent job on him after he started to heat up. I think Durant kind of flipped that switch and got back on track, but that doesn't discount the fact that Tatum was able to get into that rhythm in the first place. It's tough, though, because a lot of this does trace back to the shooting, and maybe it is as simple as that. After all, it is the NBA in 2024. I get how these things go. On the other side, Booker had another poor shooting performance, which has happened a bit lately. He's only been playing in 2 games, but it happened on Monday also. And then Royce O'Neal just did not have it going at all tonight. 0 of 7 from the field, 0 of 5 from deep. If that's a little different, maybe things go better. We'll talk about the rotation and Nurkic and some of that stuff as we get to the last segment here. But the last part of this, and it's all connected. I get that. It's basketball. You run back and forth on the court. All the things bleed into each other. But pace was a major issue tonight. I don't think the Suns played with that kind of purposeful randomness, the spontaneity we've been talking about this week since KD said it on Monday. And they allowed Boston to do that. Last year when Joe Mazzulla took over for the Celtics, their word, their phrase, their buzzword was random offense. And I actually think even dating back to Ime Udoka, they were talking about that. It's not that different than spontaneous basketball. Just, guys, I'm not cutting the Suns slack. That is a lot of how a lot of NBA teams play these days. And Boston was just able to do it without being uncomfortable at all. 24 fast break points for them. And as I've referenced a lot of times, Cleaning the Glass has transition efficiency numbers for each game as well, cleaningtheglass.com. The Celtics were able, almost a fifth of their possessions, of their scoring possessions, were in transition, and they scored 1.8 points per play in those situations, which added up to them improving their offensive rating by 10 points per 100 possessions, extrapolated out like that. So the Celtics scored, they had a 131 offensive rating today without any of their transition success, they would have had a 121 offensive rating. They probably still would have won this game, but that is a large part of why it was so lopsided. So that is a huge part of why the Suns lost this game. That is a real reason the Suns lost this game. But enough with the bad. There was a little bit of good, a little bit of confusing, and a little bit of silver lining, and we'll get into all of those things in just 1 second. First, today's show brought to you by Stitch Fix. You know, that instant confidence boost you get from an outfit that makes you look really good. Of course you do. And that's what you get with Stitch Fix. With Stitch Fix, you get a stylist who understands your style, size, and budget. They do all the shopping for you, making it the easiest way to update your wardrobe this season. I just give my stylist at Stitch Fix my size, style, and budget preferences. You just order boxes when you want, how you want. No subscription required, and they send you back 5 just for you pieces plus outfit recommendations and pro styling advice. I keep what works and send back the rest just like you can. You get just right pieces, fits on point, and it's all super easy. If you don't like shopping, if you don't know what you're looking for or even what fits you well and doesn't, Stitch Fix can make you look good and feel good. And if you don't love something, just send it back. Shipping, returns, and exchanges are always free. Style that makes you feel good as you look. Get started today at stitchfix.com/lockedon. That's stitchfix.com/lockedon. stitchfix.com/lockedon. Keeping it rolling for one final segment here. Let's get into our bench mob vibe check. I'm tinkering with the Bull breakout watch. I think I've done that in the past, but, the reason it has to be the bench mob vibe check is because Vogel is not playing Bull enough for a breakout. That Houston game, we thought we had something. There have been moments. He continues to produce when he gets time on the court, and yet 15 minutes tonight. I believe 4 of those came in garbage time after the starters left the game. 9 of those came in the first half. So in the actual rotation, end of third into early fourth, where Bull would have gotten back into the game, he just didn't. And I don't really get it. This game was a perfect illustration, in my opinion, of how Bull is overcoming the obvious weaknesses in his game. And I'll tell you what I mean. We know what the limitations are. He can be out-physicaled. He can, and obviously that was an issue today, as I've mentioned multiple times. So, okay, I get that. He can be he can make some awkward decisions on offense. I'd say those are his 2 main issues. Let's take the offense first, right? He made 2 threes. He also passed up a couple. But on the plays where he passed them up, I believe on one, he ended up getting an offensive rebound and a putback. And on the other, the ball kept moving, and he ended up getting the ball back and taking another 3. So I'm never going to fault somebody for overpassing. There's a version of Bull, if you've paid attention to this guy dating back to Oregon, where if he were to pass up a 3, he would have tried to dribble it into traffic and, get a dunk or, get fancy and pull up from mid-range. Do any number of far worse and damaging things than overpassing, which is really what he's doing now. And if he's going to crash the offensive glass and try to make the right play and give effort even after maybe not taking an ideal shot, it's really hard to say that he's killing you. On defense, I continue to point out that I think his transition defense can often be pretty impactful. I think that he's really not playing enough and being put in a position on the ball very often where his maybe being a little foul prone becomes an issue. And I think especially when he plays next to Jusuf Nurkic, which he did in that first half quite a bit, he tends to actually be positive on defense a lot of the time, when he is able to be in more of that roaming, helping role. I just don't see enough occasions in these games where Bol is getting beaten off the bounce or, getting his ankles broken or getting posted up and embarrassed or any of that to explain why he's playing so little. I'm not saying that's going to be the difference between a win and a loss. I'm not even saying, it's 15 minutes is a little fake, because if the Suns had been close down the stretch, he actually would have played less than that because the garbage time stuff wouldn't have come. So let's just say he played more like 10 minutes, 12 minutes tonight. What are we really talking about in a version where Vogel does trust him more? No more than 20. But considering that Wainwright was cold, I'm not even really sure why he was playing, and O'Neal was cold and Book was cold, and they needed a little bit of juice on the offensive end, frankly. And none of the other guys who did play, I wouldn't say actually were really helping the defense, even if that was the mix that Vogel was trying to chase. You just kind of spin yourself in circles trying to understand the justification for not just playing a guy who's good at basketball and doing what he's asked to do. It genuinely is boggling the mind a little bit. And, we talked about it with Brandon Duenas on Monday's show, and I think the best way to put it is he's just one of those guys that the way he plays and his limitations and everything else are kind of a coach's worst nightmare, but I think a coach's truest worst nightmare is losing, and he may over time, help the Suns win some games more if he's able to play more than he is right now. Let's get to the Nurk report to close things out, though. Yusuf Nurkic, again a 20 rebound game, again a 5+ assist game with 6, and yet a little bit of a weird one on offense. The Celtics, talked about their physicality at the beginning, the way that they just play rough. They have a lot of guys who embrace that, on the defensive end especially. But they're not the hugest team in terms of, they're not like the Nick Nurse Raptors or, Mike Budenholzer's Bucks when Giannis was at his peak and Brook was a little younger and Middleton was a little more spry, and Holiday was there too, obviously. Or whatever the Lakers under Vogel, even, let's just use a familiar example. That's not really what the Celtics are. They just use their physicality. They're always on a string. They know how they want to play, and they take up space. But really more so with their brain and positioning and knowing, again, how they want to scheme against your action than just because their bodies are bigger than yours, So that actually posed Nurkic some problems, I think, just like it did this whole team. But it's not like Horford was piling up blocks against Nurkic or that Nurkic was taken out of the game in some way, shape, or form. Or even really that he was out of sorts because he was playing against a smaller matchup. Horford isn't really that. So I think it was just, okay, I'm getting the ball on the short roll. I'm getting the ball on the roll. I have a path to the basket, but there's 6 arms between me and what I'm trying to do. There's help coming if I put the ball on the ground or try to pivot or spin or take a second to think about what I'm doing. And I do think that he's not a natural scorer. He's not a natural scorer. So when he has to string moves and processing thoughts and making decisions together, all with the ball in his hands or all with the threat of the ball in his hands, that's where Nurkic gets tied up a little bit. And I think that's what happened tonight. He was also very frustrated by that physicality, just as much as anybody else. And I think that can be good and bad, right? He is a little bit of an enforcer on this team, but he does also contribute to some of the Suns' worst tendencies that I started with when games get like that, where he's in the ref's ear, He's getting frustrated. He's letting it affect his effort and his getting back into plays and just staying with the flow of the game and not letting himself get taken out of it. Nurkic is very similar to Book and KD and Beal in that way. So it does start to pile up, and it happened with Nurkic. That said, to continue to be productive and impactful and in position to succeed against teams that you don't really match up awesome against, I still think Nurkic deserves a lot of praise for that. And so I'll give it to him here. That will wrap us up for the day. Final show of the week. Might do one against after the Hornets game if the Suns are competitive. We will have to really gauge that and see. But hit follow or subscribe wherever you are listening or watching. We'll have more fun throughout the weekend as the Suns finish off their road trip. And I'll talk to you guys then.